Tonight on Primetime Politics, outlawing symbols of hate.
Sadly, there is no community that is immune from hate in this country.
The Justice Minister unveils the government's first crime bill, 4 new offenses to prevent hate-motivated attacks on people and places of worship. Coming up, we'll speak to the Ottawa Bureau Chiefs and ask why the Carney government has prioritized this bill. Also,
no, we're not at war. If the president thought he was at war with Canada, you'd see a whole different kind of relationship.
We'll get reaction to comments made by the U.S. ambassador this week, including his thoughts on Canadians and the elbows-up rhetoric. Plus, polls analyst Éric Grenier and Philippe Fournier, is Mark Carney's honeymoon with Canadians coming to an end? This is Primetime Politics. Hello, I'm Michael Serapio. Well, the Carney government unveiled their first law and order bill today, focusing in on hate crimes and introducing new criminal offenses that would make it illegal to promote hatred against a specific group using symbols of hate, like swastikas and symbols used by terrorist entities. Now, the bill also aims to prevent intimidation and obstruction at religious institutions, new laws that will be layered onto and can be prosecuted in addition to current hate laws. Take a listen now to the Justice Minister, Sean Fraser.
One of the great promises of Canada is the ability of our citizens to live freely in their communities, regardless of the color of their skin, the God they pray to, or the person that they love. Sadly, too many Canadians are robbed of these freedoms that so many of us take for granted. Frankly, the prevalence of hate crimes in this country that steal those freedoms are something that should shock the conscience of every Canadian.
Now, earlier I did speak about these new laws with Robert Fife, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail, Tonda MacCharles, the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star, and Joël-Denis Bellavance, Ottawa Bureau Chief for LaPresse. So listen, let's get down to business here. We're wrapping up the first week of this fall session, and while many priorities were laid out, I do want to focus on law and order, because what we saw on the Friday, Sean Fraser, the Justice Minister, essentially introducing new hate crime legislation, 4 new criminal code offenses, making it illegal to promote hatred against an identifiable group using symbols of hate. Take a listen to what we heard from the Justice Minister.
We are moving forward with establishing a new crime of hate. This will operate by layering on top of existing criminal offenses with a new offense that will specifically target hate where that crime was committed because of their motivation of hatred towards the victim.
Again, that was Sean Fraser, the Justice Minister. The bill also aims to prevent intimidation and obstruction at religious institutions. Now, there are already hate crimes on the books. So why the need to introduce this? Why make it the government priority? Because this is the first crime and order bill from this government ball.
Well, look, I think we've seen since October 7th of 2 years ago, the killing of 1,200 Israelis, and many of them women and children, as well as the war that's gone on in Gaza, that our own streets have seen protests that have in some cases been quite ugly, going after synagogues or Jewish schools, going after Jewish businesses. The display of Hamas flags and by right-wing groups, Nazi flags. And equally, there have, although not on the same level, but there's been desecration of Muslim mosque and harassment of Muslims. And I think that the government has reached to the point where we've got to send a message to people that you cannot do this. So these things are on the books, and the police have not enforced them. But this is really a message to the police that you've got to start dealing with this on a much more serious level.
Well, certainly it expands their arsenal, if you will, Bob, because, you do have, again, existing laws, but then you can layer these on. Talk to us about why the government wanted to make this a priority, Tonda.
I mean, the entire Canadian population has been riveted by what's happened in the Middle East, and the conflict and the divisions it's fostered have played out in our society. In a sense, it's a bit of a hangover from previous Parliament, and it's also sort of a bit of a low-hanging fruit. Everything else that they have to do is going to be big, complex, and require money. So this is a first early piece of crime legislation that a lot of the parties might agree on. So maybe it's easy to get through Parliament. That might explain why now, why it's the first. In short order, we're expecting to see other crime legislation, bail reform, for example, and very quickly this fall we'll get other pieces of legislation where it'll be harder for the government to get some unanimity or consensus or any support really in some aspects of their massive bills to regulate online harms or to deal with AI, for example. So I think that explains some of it. Who's going to be their dance partner on this? I couldn't say just yet, but because I haven't seen the other party's reaction yet. But I think that's not something that's going to, I think, get a lot of opposition at this stage, certainly from the Conservatives. I can see them getting some Conservative support for this.
Joël-Denis?
Well, the Bloc Québécois, for one, has been pushing for harder sentences, harder measures on hate crime. There was a speech made by Adil Sharkawi in Montreal that encouraged hate towards Jewish people, and that got a lot of attention in Quebec. And there's also been a push by the provinces for Ottawa to adopt more real, convincing measures to fight crimes in Canada. It's been the topic of discussions at the last Council of Federation. And so there is sort of almost unanimity or consensus among the provinces. And I guess that consensus is also slowly but surely going to the House of Commons. And I expect, most political parties in the House of Commons, although it's a minority, to support those measures when it comes to a vote.
But in any crime legislation, the big question is enforcement. I mean, if already the laws that are on the books have difficulty being enforced by police, they fall down the priority list when the police are dealing with so many other crimes. And so in this case also, who is going to be the agency or the body responsible for really giving wings to this legislation? You know what I mean? Yeah. On any given weekend, there are protests around the national capital, and there's a police presence. But their job there is to really kind of keep the peace and not get people too riled up or cause conflict or instigate anything happening. And so, the sight of some of these symbols might be something they'll be looking for, but I think that they'll be all in a very delicate balance about enforcement. Enforcement's going to be the big issue.
But I think less so, because you're seeing protests outside of synagogues or mosques, for example, and some ugly stuff going on there, or outside of Jewish schools and that.
Meant to intimidate, right?
And that's got to stop. And I think that's a really, really good message. And the other issue that's going to be on the government's plate is bail reform. This is a big issue. The police have already, police chiefs have talked to the Prime Minister about the problem of, the premiers have talked about the problem of perennial offenders getting out of jail very, very quickly and then recommitting some horrendous crime. And the Conservatives are advocating a three-strike rule. So if you've done 3 crimes in a row, you never get any bail. I'm not sure that's the answer. And the government, unless Tonda knows no more about the justice file than I do, but we haven't really seen what the government is looking to deal with this bail reform.
I'm going to jump in here because I do want to talk about bail as well. And yes, the federal government, the Carney government says they will introduce some type of amendments to bail reform. The Conservatives not waiting though. They use their first opposition day of this new session or this fall session to introduce this 3 strikes so you're out bill. Take a listen to Pierre Poilievre from earlier this week.
All of these scumbags should have been in jail. And if conservative laws had been in place, they would have been in jail.
I don't want to minimize the importance of it because, we, to your point, Bob, we've heard police chiefs, we've heard people involved in criminal justice calling for bail reform. But I do wonder because this is the first move from the Conservatives. Do the Liberals, does the Mark Carney government risk losing the narrative on this, as the Liberals did with affordability, that it is the Conservatives moving first on touching bail, Bob?
Well, I'm not quite sure of that, because the government gets the credit for bringing in the legislation. It depends on how tough it is, or and whether he can be successful in tearing it apart. There will be, I think, some debate within the Liberal caucus about it. I know members of the Black caucus are concerned that any kind of bail is not going to be aimed at Indigenous and Black people who often get discriminated the most in the justice system. So, but I don't know what they're planning on doing. And once we have a sense of what the government's doing, I suspect it'll be very along the lines of what the police associations have been talking about, but I just don't know.
What is interesting about that dynamics is, since the Liberal government was re-elected, we've seen the two-track issues: the economy and justice system, and those two tracks are big, big issues for the Conservative Party. So clearly, the government is again on Mr. Carney's watch going to center-right issues that are facing the nations, and then so it leaves, a little place for the progressive issues like the environment, for example. So that, I think, is an element that the government cannot neglect, because it could lead to the rise again to the NDP or the progressive forces in Canada.
But I also think that the government is alive now to the fact that those are the biggest concerns on Canadians' minds too. I mean, you go across this country and you don't have to tap very far to find out pocketbook, economic, household issues, one thing, and the problems that people face on the streets, be it violence, property crime, things that they're looking at as fallout from the opioid crisis in every city and town in this country. People are aware that there's higher rates of break-ins and whatnot. So crime is a big thing for the population, and I think that the Liberals are trying to also respond to that, because it is a big winner for the Conservatives, but they also have to actually do something about it. And the devil will be in the details of their bail reform. I don't think you'll see them adopt the slogans, 3 strikes you're out, because that's a slogan that a previous Conservative government used in its judicial bail reforms and was struck down by the courts. And so, somewhere in there, I think you'll see the Liberals try and find space to make repeat offenses, serious violent crimes, those things, aggravating factors on sentencing, but not impose mandatory minimums or use that kind of language around it, because they still have campaigned on the idea that it's proper in a democracy to give judges and the courts their discretion and the power to decide on sentencing after hearing all the facts.
And the courts have pushed back whenever their discretion is being limited by any form of legislation.
And she's right on that, because you've got to go after the really violent people, but you don't want to sweep up people and like large numbers of Indigenous and Black people who may have committed smaller crimes because of their socioeconomic status, for example, and then deny them bail. So I would imagine we're going to get a more middle-of-the-road approach to this than the Conservative one.
And they'll probably target, right? They'll probably target crimes, they'll target things like intimate partner violence for more serious offenses, more serious consequences in terms of some things. They may try to do, again, some kind of reverse onus on bail for serious offenses. In other words, rather than automatically assuming that an accused person, unless they're an immediate risk of flight or danger, should be released until their trial happens, they'll put the onus on the defense to say why they shouldn't be held, why they should be released. And that's, right now, that's some space where the Liberals can move that would politically address what they see as the issue, but not adopt the Conservative slogans.
Okay, so we're going to have to watch, because again, the Conservatives are there'll be a debate sometime next week on their bill. The government says they're going to introduce their own. I want to move on right now, because before we're done, I also want to talk about the U.S. Ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra, because he spoke to the Halifax Chamber. Clip a minute, but this is a good clip. So he addressed the Halifax Chamber of Commerce this week, and he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that he was disappointed that he came to this country and disappointed in the anti-American sentiment in Canada. Take a listen right now to the U.S. Ambassador to this country.
I'm disappointed that I came to Canada, a Canada that it is very, very difficult to find Canadians who are passionate about the American-Canadian relationship. Okay? You ran a campaign where, you know, it was anti-American, elbows up, me too. You know, it was an anti-American campaign. That has continued. That's disappointing.
Now, of course, you know, Canadian sentiment vis-a-vis the United States is up and down, right?
Like, I mean, come on.
Okay.
They declared war.
Robert Fife, folks. Yes.
They declared a trade war on Canada. The president says he wants Canada to be the 51st state. He's always insulting Canada. What do you think Canadians are going to do when they feel that we were close to the Americans, and then you have a president who treats Canada with such disdain? There's a reason why Canadians aren't going to the United States anymore, and there's a reason why we have that kind of anger. And it certainly isn't because we're anti-American. They've made us that. I just, you know, that guy is out to lunch.
I think he's speaking from a very wounded pride in the American administration, where they see that, you know, the threats of annexation didn't go over. They were the ones who talked about annexing us without a war, just economically and just taking away, making us the 51st state. But this administration is extremely vexed by the actions that the Canadians have taken on a individual political consumer level, from the premiers, the provincial and municipal levels, and from the federal government initially, right? They don't like being told that we're going to try and go our own way or without you. And they thought it was going to be an easier romp, I think, you know, but it's anything but.
I will say the one thing I trip on is, you know, a lot of the sentiment is grassroots sentiments. And I think there's something to be said. Perhaps political leaders need to take this under advisement, but, you know, to criticize the Canadian people for having feelings about something is
you try to squash us and we're supposed to just roll over.
The other cheek hit me in the face. But for Mr. Extra to say that, I think, first of all, Mr. Extra is very close to Mr. Trump. So what Mr. Extra says, I think you could say that matters. And you could say that Mr. Trump feels the same way. But clearly, like Mr. Trump, Mr. Extra seems to be living in a parallel universe. There was a story on CNN that was aired this week showing that Americans are now putting the Canadian flag on their bags when they travel abroad because of the cold reception they're getting everywhere. So it's not only in Canada, but it's pretty much a universal sentiment towards the United States right now, and it's a result of the policies of Mr. Trump.
I mean, myself, when I went to the United States this summer, and other people have gone, people are apologizing for the way that the Trump administration and the MAGA crowd have been treating Canada.
Well, I think this is a distinction that, you know, perhaps the U.S. ambassador would hear. You know, Canadians don't despise Americans. No. You know, it's this political moment,
but again,
and what's happening to the economy.
It speaks to how the political perception of the White House is towards our tactics and our strategies. And lucky for the federal government that Canadians have taken aboard themselves to fight it as well. Had the call for Canadians to say, you know, support each other and our own provinces, for example, in the vacation industry this summer, not change their travel plans. And, you know, if Canadians had continued to travel south, continued to buy American products, continued to do take the flights and spend the money in the South, then why would they take us seriously on our threats to try and go this alone, or take them seriously at their word? So I think that there's a big political message there. It's working, and I think that that's a good message for Canada.
And our thanks to Robert Fife, Tonda MacCharles, and Joël-Denis Bellavance. We have a lot more to say, and what you heard is just part of a new podcast from PrimeTime Politics and CPAC. It's called The Bureau Chiefs with Michael Serapio. New episodes will drop each Friday that PTP is on air. You can get the premiere episode right now. Well, we're now wrapping up the first week of the fall session. As stated, a week that began cordially, even if only for a moment. Take a look.
I thank the Prime Minister for calling a prompt by-election. I wonder if one day he might regret that decision. But
he may notice a few things have changed since he was here last.
but that collegiality soon gave way to the business of Parliament. And to tell us about how Canadians are feeling of our political leaders right now, we are joined by Philippe Fournier, the founder and the writer of 338 Canada, and Éric Grenier, founder and writer of the Writ. Hello to both of you.
Hello.
Good evening, Michael.
Okay, listen, let's begin with how Canadians are feeling right now about the parties, because, you know, to these layman eyes, it looks like the numbers have not changed that much since the vote. Éric, I'll get you to start us off.
Yeah, I really don't think we've seen much change in the voting intention since the last election. A couple polls have sometimes the Liberals a little bit higher, sometimes they're a little bit lower. We see the same thing for the Conservatives. NDP seems to be a little bit higher than they were on election night. But I think overall, I'm not seeing a lot of regret on the part of Canadians for any of their voting choices, which means if an election were held today, very likely we'd have a very similar outcome to what we had back in April.
Okay, so Philippe, does that mean then that Mark Carney's honeymoon with Canadians is still ongoing?
Well, that's a good question. I will be able to answer that maybe next month, because summer polling, when Parliament is not sitting, it captures the mood of Canadians. But can we really gauge where the honeymoon is going? We saw the satisfaction number for Mr. Carney going down in several pollsters, but it's still well in positive territory, including where it matters for the Liberals, BC, Ontario, and Quebec. And so now I would say it's the status quo.
Okay, status quo with some softening when it comes to satisfaction. But, you know, we did see Pierre Poilievre back in the House after winning the August by-election in Battle River Crowfoot. But his favorability numbers, when you look at that, they still trail Mark Carney's quite substantially. So I'll get both of you to weigh in on this, beginning with you, Éric. What does this tell you about the task ahead for Pierre Poilievre, or perhaps the Conservative Party membership as they approach a review in January?
I think this is the big challenge for Pierre Poilievre, is that his numbers have not gotten better since the last election, and his numbers weren't good enough to win that election. So not only does he need to gain some support among Canadians, regain some support that he had lost after Justin Trudeau's resignation, he does have to improve his personal numbers. They are, in some measures, getting actually worse than they were in the election. And I think this is the biggest danger for him, because an election, when it comes down to it, is still a choice between two different options. When it was Pierre Poilievre versus Justin Trudeau, people liked Pierre Poilievre. When it was Pierre Poilievre versus Mark Carney, they liked Mark Carney. And we're not seeing that gap has been reduced at all. So while Pierre Poilievre has some work to do to get his numbers up in general, he especially needs to get his numbers up in comparison to Mark Carney. Because as long as Mark Carney is still preferred on a lot of major issues over Pierre Poilievre, Poilievre's not going to win an election.
Yeah, Éric, what do you say? Excuse me, Philippe, what do you say to that?
Well, I mean, when we break down the results, you saw the numbers from the Angus Street Institute, and breaking down the results by region, by gender, by gender and age, we see how dire the situation is for Mr. Poilievre. He is still beloved by conservative voters. In fact, 84% of those who voted conservatives in April say they still have a favorable view of Poilievre. But however, it doesn't go across partisan lines. Whereas when you look at the numbers for Mark Carney, yes, of course, Liberals like him, but he still gets some support from NDP voters, from Bloc voters. And so Pierre Poilievre really has to grow his base, especially in this new two-party environment.
Mm-hmm. Now, you know, interestingly, I was in Toronto when the Liberal cabinet had, you know, what would have been called a retreat in the past, but their planning session, if you will. And Leger briefed the cabinet about Canadian priorities. And while, you know, Trump and the trade war certainly led the Liberals to victory during the campaign, as we heard from Leger, that's no longer the number one issue amongst Canadians. Affordability is once again the number one issue. So I wonder then, how does that shift in priority potentially hurt the Prime Minister's numbers, potentially help the Conservative leader's numbers? Philippe, I'll get you to start.
Well, I will say on this that the promises of Mark Carney when he did the campaign was to eventually solve the U.S.-Canada trade partnership. This hasn't been done yet. I think many Canadians are patient, but their fuse will be very short if it's not fixed by, let's say, next spring, especially in the light of a very big deficit that is awaiting the federal government. And so for now, I would still say there's patience, but it may not last.
Éric?
Yeah, I think it's natural that Canadians are getting a little bit of Trump fatigue. I mean, seeing him on the news all the time, everybody gets kind of tired of it after a while. And we have seen that those other issues like cost of living have been topping the polls. But it's really hard to decouple those two. If we do have, as Philippe says, we don't have some resolutions to some of these issues we have with the United States over the longer term, that will impact cost of living. So I do think that it is still an important issue in the sense that while Canadians might not be thinking about Donald Trump every day, if Mark Carney does deliver on that, then it will help him on the other issues. So Donald Trump, in many ways, he might not always be top of mind, but he's always kind of there. And I think that that's not going to go away as long as he's in the White House.
Okay. Well, listen, the session is underway. Happy to have the two of you back on the program. Happy to be back on air. So I look forward to more conversations. Éric, Philippe, thank you for this.
Thanks.
Thank you, Michael.
Time now for a look at what else happened in politics today. The Prime Minister wrapped up a two-day visit to Mexico today, touring a Canadian Pacific Kansas City rail yard in the capital. Now, while in Mexico, Carney signed an agreement with President Claudia Sheinbaum aimed at strengthening economic and security ties between the two countries. The two leaders say the agreement will complement the existing CUSMA deal. This, as Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc announced consultations for a renewed continental trade deal have now started, with Ottawa talking to industry and the provinces.
Bring everyone together. Dream big again. Put the people's demands to the powerful and win. Remind all Canadians that they are the money, but we are the many.
Avi Lewis is the first big name to announce his bid to be the next leader of the federal NDP. Lewis is the son of former Ontario NDP leader Stephen Lewis and the grandson of former federal NDP leader David Lewis. Avi Lewis says he will run on a platform of implementing a wealth tax, a national cap on rent increases, and more comprehensive public health. And finally, drug manufacturer Moderna announced today it has begun producing its COVID-19 vaccine in Canada for the first time. Industry Minister Melanie Joly was on hand for the announcement at the new mRNA vaccine biomanufacturing facility in Laval. Well, that is Primetime Politics for this Friday. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back next week. Until then, have a great and safe weekend.